Here's a fact that most people in the trust space completely skip over. A trust can hold assets, distribute wealth, and protect entire family legacies and still fall apart from the inside if two things aren't managed with precision: the beneficiary connection and the record of who owns what inside the structure. If you're new here, welcome. You picked a strong video to land on. Today, we're closing out the Executive Secretary series with two of the most operationally critical functions this role performs. First, how the Executive Secretary interfaces with beneficiaries and why that interface must be managed with precision. Second, trust capital units, what they are, how certificates get created, and how the register that tracks them becomes the source of truth inside a private structure. These two subjects are directly related. They're two inside of the same question: who is connected to this trust and in what capacity? Let's talk about the first subject: how the Executive Secretary interfaces with beneficiaries. The Executive Secretary is involved in all correspondence with beneficiaries. Every letter, every notice, every formal communication that moves between the structure and the beneficiary passes through this role. This isn't administrative convenience, it's structural control. The Executive Secretary is the managed point of contact, and that managed contact is what keeps the trust's internal communications private, professional, and properly documented. Think about why that matters. In a privately held trust structure, information is protected by design. When beneficiaries receive information directly from multiple sources, trustees, the grantor, outside administrators, that creates noise, inconsistency, and potential vulnerability. The Executive Secretary creates a single controlled channel, one point of contact, one voice, one paper trail. Now, take that a step further. If beneficiaries attend a Board of Trustee meeting, it is the Executive Secretary who typically handles the contact, not the trustee directly, the Executive Secretary. This role manages the logistics, the communication, the documentation around the attendance. That beneficiary doesn't just walk into a board meeting unmanaged. The Executive Secretary ensures the engagement happens properly, formally, and in a way that protects everyone, especially the integrity of the trust itself. But correspondence is only half of the picture. There's a second dimension to beneficiary interface that is just as critical: document alignment. The Executive Secretary must ensure that all asset holding trust documents are aligned and that the correct beneficiaries are connected to the correct trust. In a simple single trust structure, this may seem straightforward, but most serious private wealth structures involve multiple trusts: asset holding trusts, operating trusts, trusts serving different purposes for different family members or entities. In that environment, misalignment is a structural vulnerability. If a beneficiary is assigned to the wrong trust, or if a document hasn't been updated to reflect a change in the structure, the framework can fracture. Distribution can go to the wrong party. Legal interests can be misrepresented, and the precision that makes the trust powerful becomes a liability. The Executive Secretary is the checkpoint, the internal gatekeeper of accuracy. Remember, the Executive Secretary is the backbone of the trust, but all of these responsibilities do not have to be undertaken by one individual. So in short, don't let this Executive Secretary responsibilities overwhelm you and make you think that it all needs to be handled by one person. It is a function and can be shared. So let me get back. A trust without accurate beneficiary documentation isn't just disorganized, it's exposed. If you're starting to see how every role inside a trust structure has a precision function that makes the whole thing work, subscribe right now so you never miss a video in this series, and stay with us throughout the full video because we're just getting to the trust capital units, and that's where the picture gets even clearer. A trust capital unit is a unit of beneficial interest. In a trust, think of it as a formal documented representation of a beneficiary's stake in a particular trust. It defines the nature and extent of their interests, not as ownership in the way most people understand ownership, but as a private internal record of beneficial entitlement within the trust framework. This is a critical distinction. Trust capital units, they are not exposed to the public. They are not subject to the kind of legal vulnerability that comes with personal title. Titles. I'm just ask you real quick. Do you have a title? Do you know anybody else who has a title? They exist inside a private structure, documented, tracked, and managed internally. That privacy is not an accident. It's the point. The Executive Secretary is responsible for creating the certificates of trust capital units. These certificates are the formal instruments that represent a beneficiary's interest in a given trust. They are the paper record of beneficial entitlement. And in a private structure, the paper record is everything. If it isn't documented correctly, it doesn't exist in any enforceable form. The executive secretary makes sure it exists and that it exists correctly. But there's more to this than issuing a certificate and filing it away. The executive secretary must also keep the trust capital unit registers current. The trust capital units register is the living ledger of the trust beneficial interest. It tracks who holds what interest and what trust at what time. It records additions when a new beneficiary is connected and issued units. It records removals when a beneficiary's interest changes or is withdrawn. It records reissuances when certificates are updated to reflect changes in the structure. At any given moment, the register is the authoritative source of truth for who holds what inside the trust. Now, trustees can manage this themselves, and in some structures they do. But in practice, it is almost always the executive secretary who adds, removes, and issues trust capital unit. Why? Because the executive secretary role exists precisely to handle the administrative and operational precision that trustees who are focused on governance, fiduciary responsibility, and high-level decision-making shouldn't be spending their time on the granular level. The trustees govern. The executive secretary executes. Here's the thing that ties both subjects together, and this is important. The beneficiary interface function and the trust capital unit function are two parts of the same operational reality. When the executive secretary handles beneficiary correspondence, they're communicating with the people whose interests are documented in the register. When they issue a certificate of trust capital units, they are formalizing the interests of someone who's connected to the trust was managed through the correspondence process. These two functions don't just coexist, they depend on each other. A beneficiary whose correspondence is clean but whose units aren't properly registered has an undocumented interest. A certificate that's been issued but never followed up with proper beneficiary communication creates confusion and potential conflict. When both sides of the equation work together, when the correspondence is precise, is current, the structure operates with the kind of quiet, protected efficiency that private wealth requires. Think about what it means for a multi-trust structure holding real property, business assets, or intellectual property across different instruments. Every beneficiary knows where they stand. Every certificate is current. Every document reflects the structure as it actually is. That's not just organization, that's the protection. And if you've been watching this series from the beginning, take a moment and recognize what you now understand about the executive secretary. This role maintains meeting records and trust minutes. It manages all formal correspondence. It ensures documentation aligns across holding trusts. It handles beneficiary contact at board of trustee meetings. It creates and tracks trust capital unit certificates. It keeps the register together. Every single one of those functions exists to protect the structure from the inside out. The executive secretary isn't a support role. It is a functional pillar of how a real private trust operates. That's not paperwork. That's architecture. If you made it through this entire executive secretary series, from the first video on what this role is and why it exists, all the way through to this final video on beneficiary interface and trust capital units, I want to acknowledge that directly. You did the work, and the understanding you've built isn't theoretical. It's practical, structural, and operational. You now know what a real trust needs at the administrative level to function correctly. Most people who talk about trust will never go this deep. You did though, and that puts you in a completely different category. Here's where we need to go from here. Next up is the General Manager series. 2 focused lessons on the role that serves as the operational engine of a trust structure. If the executive secretary is the keeper of the records and the gatekeeper of beneficiary interfaces, the general manager is the person who ensures the structure actually runs. It may seem like where are they different? How are they different? I'm gonna show you. And it's a big difference. Sure, a general manager can carry some executive secretary roles and vice versa. You wanna understand the role of the general manager before we get to the trustees. The trustee and trustee responsibility series comes after it, and it's the most information dense, most directly actionable content this channel has produced. It speaks directly to controlling assets without holding personal title. If you've been building towards understanding what it really means to hold power inside a trust without being exposed by it? Watch the General Manager series first. Then we'll be ready to go through the trustees together. Before you go, make sure you're locked in for everything that's coming. Subscribe right now if you haven't already. Every video in this series builds on the last, and the General Manager and Trustee series are not ones you want to come to late. Watch the full video if you haven't finished yet, because the context compounds. Then go join the school community waitlist. That's where the deeper conversations happen with people who are serious about building what you're building. Download the free What is a Trust ebook, linked in the description. It's free and it locks in the foundation. And grab the Trust Book checklist pinned in the comments. It's a practical reference tool that connects everything you're learning to what a real structure actually requires on paper. Use it. It was built for where you are right now. You came this far into the series not knowing what an executive secretary inside a trust even was. You're leaving it knowing exactly what this role does, why it exists, and why no serious private structure operates without it. That shift in understanding, that's yours. Nobody can take it. The General Manager series is next, and I promise you, what you already know is going to make that series hit so different. And I'm gonna see you in that next one. Peace.